Hey, welcome to Classroom U. My name is Karen Baptiste, and I can't wait to get started with you. The role of teacher and leader are two sacred roles that should never be held as a right, but a privilege. I'm excited that you are here watching this because it tells me that you recognize and are willing to take on the responsibility to challenge the oppressive structures that exist in education. Students will be returning to schools in 2 months, and they are just as anxious as you are. If you choose to remain silent, then that is just as much an injustice as the hideous events that play out in many of the communities we serve. So I'm going to go over the 3 A's you can do before they return to school and once they return to school. So sit tight. I'm going to help you move out of your role of ally to abolitionist. That is our responsibility as educators. Race, trauma, and equity all exist within all structures of education. So it's important that we tackle this head on. The first thing is to acknowledge your student. That's the first A. They are people first, then they're your students second. So, how do you do this? You do this by building positive relationships from the onset. This is critical to establishing trust. That's your first lesson plan, building relationships with not only your students, but their families. Once you get your class roster, call each of your students to introduce yourself to them and their parents and or caregivers. Ask them about their time home and what excites them about returning to school and what makes them nervous. Also ask them what they would like to learn about this school year. This will give you enough time to prep and get all the materials and resources you need so that you can start to make school engaging and fun for scholars. Plan ahead of time what relationship building activities you will do for the first week of school to get to know each other. How will you greet your students at the door? Is it high fives, handshakes? Think about what you will say to them every day they come into your classroom. Will you be at the carpool line? This gives you an opportunity to meet parents and or whoever their caregivers are. Eating breakfast is another great way to start to build relationships with scholars. These small moments and gestures have huge impact because the human brain feels safest and relaxed when we are connected to people we trust. Acknowledge the pain and trauma some of your students will come back to school with. Everyone is affected differently by traumatic events. Not only is the world dealing with COVID-19, but some children are living in shelters or couch surfing. But then the world just also witnessed an atrocious death, or rather, a videotaped lynching of a Black man. So think about the impact to all children, and particularly Black children who lost loved ones in this type of manner where it wasn't videotaped. Saying you don't see color is denying a person of color's very being, not affirming their reality, and increasing the likelihood of perpetual racism. That event is going to affect a Black child much deeper than a child not of color. So acknowledge your students and create a safe space for them to seek emotional refuge. Perhaps a healing circle where students can share with you and each other what support they need from you to get through their day. If you want to maximize their learning, acknowledge their pain first. The academics come second to their physical and psychological well being. Also, as the adult, you have to acknowledge your own pain and trauma that you might be entering the classroom with. And it's okay if you are actively seeking help. Remember, your students and their parents are expecting every adult in that school building to be whole and healthy. They're not even processing the burden you are carrying. So be the one to create a healing circle for the adults in your building if no such thing exists. Affirm your students throughout the day. You do this through identity affirming practices. When you show empathy and respect for your students' cultural norms, coupled with highly engaging lessons, this not only minimizes disruptive behavior, but it shows them that you value them and their culture. Include their life experiences into your daily lessons. I often enter schools where educators are exposing students to their cultures that society has deemed acceptable all while subconsciously oppressing their students' own culture. When students say something you don't understand, ask them to share what they mean. Our language is different from theirs. Don't assume negative intent when they express themselves different from you. And don't compare your time in school and how you behave to their current day experience. Your lesson plans should always include books and or stories about people representative of your students' backgrounds. My class comprised of students from the Caribbean and Latin America. Every day, I made sure I chose books that they connected to. Engagement shot up and kids started asking to take home books because there was a level of connectedness to what they were reading and learning. I was a special education teacher, and by year two, my students started outperforming their gen ed counterparts. Students who have been historically marginalized, denied access to rigorous courses, lessons, and experienced trauma often revert to the phrase, I don't care, because they feel powerless, voiceless, and hopeless about their situation. Do not use that as an excuse not to teach them. Give them your absolute best every day. And the third A is advocate. Advocate for your students' needs. Pedagogy is never neutral. It can be used to inform, assuage pain, and improve educational conditions, or it can harm and misguide people. There's a massive injustice in schools and in teacher prep programs. I know teachers are coming out underprepared and to no fault of your own, but that also means that students leave school underprepared. I've visited many prisons where adolescents are detained, and whenever I ask them about their schooling and home life, I got responses such as, I never felt accepted in school, or I dropped out of school because the work was boring. When students become disengaged from the learning process, they engage in non productive behaviors. Provide students with meaningful and actionable feedback to develop a growth mindset about themselves and about school to counter learned helplessness and a feeling of not belonging. You hold a powerful position as a teacher, mentor, and counselor to students. So create a safe space for them to be vulnerable and trust that you won't exploit that or throw them out of class for trivial things. Keeping your students in school can literally save some of their lives. If you have resources and curriculum that is not of high quality for your students, do not be afraid to speak up and request sufficient equitable resources. That is an obligation that you have to your students and their families. Your students and their families are your clients. So every day they walk out of that building, you have to ask yourself, did they leave with a great product? I can't begin to tell you how many of my students were placed in special education because someone was annoyed with them or because they just never received high quality teaching, not because they actually needed the services. My advocacy for them resulted in many of students being decertified from special ed, and in some cases, placed in gifted and talented classes. Have fun with your teaching and make your classroom a joyous place. I remember I embedded music and dancing throughout our day, and most of my students ended up crying when the day ended. That love of learning can be infectious throughout the building if everyone takes that approach. The brain remembers negative experiences 3 times more than positive experiences. So it's important that you are just bombarding them with positivity all throughout the day. So incorporating joyful activities will also lead to the adults going home with way more energy and not have to make every happy hour in town. I guarantee you that. That is my money back guarantee. I'm not saying this is going to be easy. Teaching is the most difficult but rewarding career one could ever have. You will have days that you will question if you chose the right career, and that is totally okay. But also know that you set the temperature of your classroom, and nobody can dictate to you how to feel when you walk in and out of that school building every day. Whatever you do, I encourage you to remain positive, and most of all, don't give up on our babies or yourself. It's a disservice to both. However, if you realize that you are not the person for this role, it's okay for you to step out of it and leave. Remember, students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. More now than ever, our students need you to step out of the ally role and move into the abolitionist role. So kick off the school year strong. Best wishes to you. And remember to be good to yourself and to others. I'm Dr. Karen Baptiste, signing off.